Hello and welcome to Retro Reviews, my channel where I review my favorite retro video games of all time as well as some modern releases I have recently finished. Today I wanted to give a little bonus video. I don't usually upload on the weekends, but I had some extra time, so I decided I wanted to get on here and talk about a topic that I am extremely passionate about, and that is physical media. I have always been really big into physical media. I like collecting things. I like having the games that I've played since I was a child. I like having those in physical form. Now, I don't have anything against digital games. I have plenty of digital games, especially when they don't ever release as physical releases. I don't mind digital experiences, but I do mind that when we lose storefronts, when we lose things like the 3DS storefront and the Wii U storefront that finally shut down, we lose a ton of games that are just lost into the ether forever because we don't have really any methods of preserving them. Let's talk about emulation for just a minute here. I don't want that to be the main focus. I want to do that in another video topic that I want to do. But emulation and people like dumping their games online and just putting them out there it's illegal to share those games. You can make a backup file of your own video games. You can dump the files from your own cartridges. If you can put them onto your computer, you can use those files in an emulator. Emulators are completely legal, but downloading shared ISO files of video games is the illegal portion of that. So you have to dump your own files onto your computer to utilize them on emulation and do that legally. But people will put them online because it's an easy way of preserving those games. I read a report, this is something that's kind of old news at this point, but 87% of all video games released in the United States are endangered of being just lost forever because we have not preserved them. You have tons of other media like movies and TV shows that are even like books that are preserved digitally, and they have like a whole library, an archive of them, so that you can go and see them, so they're not just lost to time forever. We have a way of preserving all of those, but video games don't have the same kind of protections for them. They don't have any kind of way to preserve them, so people do it in an illegal fashion by dumping it online and letting anybody go and download them. That's because we don't have any access to them anymore. There's so many old consoles that are out of production that had thousands and tens of thousands of games between them that are just disappearing because no one preserved them. So if you have these files, if you have your old games, you can dump them yourself. But if you want to play a lot of these games that you never got a chance to, your only recourse is to buy old hardware and go out and buy a physical copy of those games so that you can actually play them. And that is so unrealistic for almost everybody. If there's a game that you missed out on in the Super Nintendo days, you're not going to go out and try and find a Super Nintendo and then go and buy a physical copy of it. You're probably going to want to emulate it because that's the easiest way to do it. And since it's not in production anymore, where else are you going to get a digital copy unless you rely on a publisher that owns the rights to it to reproduce a digital copy for you on newer hardware? Nintendo's doing an okay job at some of their preservation, I suppose. They're usually the biggest culprit for trying to shut down emulation and ROMs and everything. And so I'm not going to give them really any credit here. I'll give them the smallest smidgen of credit I possibly can here. At least they're doing a little bit of work with the Nintendo Switch Online with their NES, SNES, Nintendo 64, Game Boy Advance library. They're putting a lot of their classic games on that library so you can access them today. I assume that's part of the reason why they're cracking down so hard on emulation. I think it's also just because they just really have a problem with it and don't want you pirating their games. But they've at least done a little bit of effort to preserve some of these games. You see the same thing with Xbox. They preserve a lot of their games digitally. PlayStation has some of their premium access titles, like the premium PS Plus premium service has some of their classic stuff on there. I think that's a garbage service. I think they should do more. But a lot of these games are just kind of disappearing because we don't have any preservation for some of the games that maybe were published under a small developer or a small publisher, and they don't have the rights to them anymore, and no one else is going to reproduce them. You have lots of these classic games that I just don't want them to be lost forever. I want people to be able to experience them. I have a problem with piracy. I don't want people pirating video games. I think you should be supporting developers. I think you should be utilizing your own copies. Whenever I emulate stuff, I utilize my own copies of video games to play these games. But at the same time, if the games aren't in production anymore and there is no way to purchase them digitally, the only way is to maintain old hardware and buy a physical copy of it secondhand. That's probably going to be extremely expensive. I just don't see the value there. No one is winning except for the people that own these games that are trying to sell them for a lot of money. And I don't have anything against those people either. They want to sell their physical copies. That's fine. They should be able to do so because they own the video game. But for everybody else, for all the people that enjoy retro video games, myself included, there's so many that they can't like possibly go out and buy all of these games physically to go back and play them. So it's this issue of do I pirate all these games so I can experience them because that's the only way I can do it, or do I spend a ton of money and buy physical copies and buy this old hardware or maintain my old hardware just so I can experience them myself? I wish there was a better way that we could just have these libraries, these digital libraries of games available to everybody, publicly available, so that we can go and play them. It should be after a certain amount of time. The developers of these old games, the publishers especially, should have no problem with us downloading them off of these file sharing websites for a digital archive, as it were, so that we can experience those games and so that they're not just lost to time. So we have a history of video games. We don't want to lose 87% of games that are out there on the market or that have been produced on the market, because that's a huge portion of our history. People that enjoy video games are just going to lose. And I don't want that to happen. I mean, imagine if you were losing a huge chunk of history for any other media. Like if for movies, for TV, for books, if we just lost 87% of all of our books, we'd be losing a huge portion of our writing history. We'd have so many great books that just would disappear forever. So I just wanted to talk about it today because it's been frustrating me. I don't like seeing specifically Nintendo cracking down on emulation sites and trying to shut down emulators, because that's how we preserve games. If you don't let us preserve them, we don't let us utilize our resources that we have, dump our own files and make digital copies of them. If you're shutting down these emulators so that we can't do that, so we can't preserve our own video games, it makes me just really want everyone to go out and pirate everything. Not saying that you should, but it makes me want that to be the case. I want people to go out and experience these games. I want it to stick it to these publishers that think they can just erase a lot of their history from their old consoles. I really want everyone to experience retro video games, all these classics, that it's really hard to do so now. Again, I'm glad you've got some stuff on the Nintendo Switch Online. There are great titles on there. You have like the SNES Classic, the NES Classic, the Sega Genesis Mini. That's a decent way to experience these old titles. But I want people to experience beyond just the ones that Nintendo and Sega want to push your way. The 20-something titles they put on those little retro consoles. The handful of titles they put on the SNES Online and NES and the Game Boy Advance. There are so many more. For every single one on those services, there's 100, 200, 300 more games that you'd be missing out on because you can't get them anymore. So I just wanted to talk about that today. Physical media is so important. I don't want to see it go away in the future. I think it's getting so much more difficult for people to see the value in physical media, specifically like people selling physical media, because most things are purchased digitally. And I want people to go out and buy physical media more and more. We need to keep it alive so we don't start losing our history. If we bought everything digitally on the PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5 eras, that's 8th and 9th generations, if we buy everything online and never buy physical copies, what happens when they shut down the storefronts for those? Because it will happen someday. Absolutely. No console is immune to a store shutting down. At one point, we're going to lose those storefronts, and you will no longer be able to download all those games. We will lose a significant portion of our video game history unless you have physical copies. I try and get physical copies for almost every single game that I play. In fact, I waited on Baldur's Gate 3. I wanted to play it so badly. I was there to purchase it day one. And I tried looking for a physical copy, and I was like, oh, it doesn't look like they're making one. I don't think they have any plans to, but I had hope. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to hold out for a while and see if they're going to make a physical copy of this game. And sure enough, I started following the Twitter. They were dropping hints, and they finally launched the physical copies of Baldur's Gate 3, the deluxe edition. I bought it right on that same day. I made sure I was there in front of the line. They have run into some production issues, and I'm still waiting on that copy. It was supposed to ship by the end of March, and then it got delayed to April and May, and now it's got delayed until end of May. I'm just itching to get that game in my hands. I want to play Baldur's Gate 3 so so bad. But I'm fine with waiting for this game because this is one of those games, one of these landmark titles in video game history that I want to have preserved forever. I want to have my physical copy, and so I can make a digital copy myself that I own, that I have a right to have on my computer, and that I can utilize when the emulation comes out for the PlayStation 5, and so that I can utilize this on my old hardware. If I can maintain my PlayStation 5 for a decade or two, then I can play it down the line. I just want to preserve these games. I want things to be preserved so everyone can experience them. I think physical media is so important, and I think you should too. If you buy most of your games digitally, I have no problem with that. Feel free, power to you. It's more convenient. But if you can support physical media, I think that you should. It's the best way to preserve our gaming history and make sure we don't lose experiences, some really wonderful things. Bloodborne is a good example of a game that's locked to a console. It's on the PlayStation 4 and nowhere else. If storefronts go down for that, the only way you can play Bloodborne will be buying a physical copy of that game. I don't want something as tremendous as Bloodborne to disappear into the ether forever. I don't want phenomenal experiences going away and then they're lost forever unless the publisher decides to re-release it down the line. We cannot depend on publishers to do that, nor should we be supporting them in just pumping out old games over and over and over again. We don't need to be buying these games over and over. If we have our own copies, then we can just make digital ones out of our physical ones and then emulate them on the computer. So I just wanted to rant about that today because I'm so worried about the future of games. I don't want physical media to go away, and I'm going to be supporting it as long as I possibly can so that we can preserve it. That's what I want to talk about today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.